Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Only Stupid Answers. We're here to talk about WandaVision, episode 4. And with me, as always, is Roxy Striar. Roxy, we talked a little bit about it before we went on air. And I'm excited to get into your thoughts on this episode, because I think you and I both have feelings.
Yeah, I usually like to just save everything for when we go on. But when it's something like this, I like to give you a heads up because I do feel like I've developed this kind of reputation for loving everything. I'm kind of just like a lover of all things. It's very rare that the internet is like, oh my God, I loved this thing. And I'm like, nah, just wasn't for me. And this was one of those situations where I took to Twitter immediately after this episode, kind of thinking a lot of people were going to feel what I felt. And everybody was like, best episode by far. So excited about the direction we're going in. This is what we've been waiting for. And I was like, wow, that was definitely my least favorite episode of WandaVision to date. And I'm kind of nervous about the direction we're going in.
I'm interested to dive into that with you. But for more about this episode that we're talking about, of course, it is episode 4 of WandaVision. It is titled We Interrupt This Program. The summary is Monica Rambeau, tasked with a special assignment regarding sentient weapons, goes missing. And this episode was directed by Matt Shackman, like the previous 3 episodes. And it was written by Bobak Esfarjani and Megan McDonnell. And of course, we've got Paul Bettany as Vision and Elizabeth Olsen Scarlet Witch, although we barely see them. We've got some other returning members of the MCU. But let's start off with the jump. At the end of last episode, Monica / Geraldine had been ejected from the Westview. Whatever's going on in Westview, she was flicked out of it. And we start this episode in a flashback where we find out that Monica was actually blipped, dusted. Roxy, we kind of discussed this on last week's podcast episode where I wanted them. Spider-Man Far From Home kind of like just brushed past the fact that everybody was gone and now they're all back. And so it was like a little bit of whiplash, because on the one hand, we start in this hospital where Monica comes back, and I don't know about you, but it took me a second to be like, because of the Vision stuff, I was like, is this Westview? What? Oh, she's coming back from being vanished. Oh my God. And the chaos. And I'm like, this is great. This is what I wanted. And then they started using the term blip again. I'm like, I hate that term. I cannot describe to you how much I hate that term, because it's such a small word for such a big thing.
It kind of, the word doesn't bother me as much, but I do feel you. I feel like Leftovers did a much better job of dealing with what exactly is happening here. I mean, they never returned, but like, I want what you want. I want more dealing with of this. And I have to say that the MCU has dealt with it kind of so little that I was I forgot when she was like, yeah, you've been gone. You know, your mom is dead and you've been gone, and I was just like, where'd she go? And it took me a second, and I was like, oh, right, Roxy, you are watching an MCU show. You went on Disney Plus and you clicked on WandaVision, because it has, even though there's been hints and flares of MCU stuff for the last 3 episodes, this was like, oh, we are part of this greater universe. We are not in our own little sitcom land. Yeah. The blip, or whatever we're calling it, DJ, the mass disappearance. They would probably make some catchy phrase for it, like we do here, where everything has like a cute name for something that's disastrous.
Well, it probably the date that it happened. It would probably, just like 9/11. It would probably be like the date.
I don't know, because like, you know, we got alliteration with like the Boston bombings. I think that maybe we might do some kind of like the Great Disappearance, or like there might be some kind of a verbiage,
or even the event. Like it's one of those, like, this is so massive. Like when we think about the devastating loss we're dealing with COVID, not to dive into all that, but it's like this half of all life on Earth vanishing is so much more significant than that if you just said the event, everybody would be like, oh yeah, where half of all of life vanished, yeah, that event, yes, we understand.
Yeah, so I get why blip doesn't work well for you, but it took me like 2 seconds too long, and I was like, get your head in the game, Rox. Mm-hmm. This is a you problem. Remember what you just clicked on. So I was actually happy with the hospital scene, because I was happy to be back in the MCU and feel like we were dealing with some things that we haven't really dealt with, and to feel that like displacement and confusion and sense of like extreme anxiety and, like I said, confusion. Like what the F is going on?
Yeah.
So that part works.
Yeah, same. I like the whole hospital sequence, and maybe similar to you at that moment, I was like, oh, I'm in. You know what I mean? And we come back from the Marvel intro. We find out that Monica works at S.W.O.R.D, which was invented by her mom, which of course makes sense from what we saw in Captain Marvel. We meet acting director Tyler Hayward, and I don't know about you, Roxy, but the second I saw this guy, I'm like, oh, he's the bad guy.
I feel you. Yeah, I could see that. You get bad guy energy all over him. He's got BGE, bad guy energy.
Bad guy energy. He's just drowning in bad guy energy. So we find out that in the comics, S.W.O.R.D is the Sentient World Observation and Response Department. In the show, we see it fairly plainly pointed out, and it's part of the dialogue as well. It's Sentient Weapons Observation and Response Department.
Why do you think he did that?
Good question. I'm not sure. I think maybe to make it work more with the fact that we're dealing with Wanda and not with aliens, because at first I was like, sentient weapons. I was like, I guess Ultron, and I guess kind of Wanda. Yeah, you know what? I guess there are enough sentient weapons just bumbling around this planet that maybe it makes sense. I would be surprised if, because the part of that weapons conversation is in the mouth of director Hayward. And so maybe, and of course it seems like Monica's more interested in exploration. So maybe that'll be the break by the end of the show, that he's gone and Monica's like, I'm in charge and it's about exploration. So now we're the sentient worlds, you know what I mean? Like, and it changes to be what it is in the comics.
That would make sense to me. I think that's a great prediction, because otherwise I get why they changed the name, but just make it a different organization. Like, why are we using the already set organization that doesn't do what you're doing? So you're just taking their acronym and changing it. So if it ends up becoming the S.W.O.R.D that we know, this is a word I have a really hard time saying, by the way.
S.W.O.R.D?
I don't know if that's all Bostonians or what, because when I think too hard about it, I say sod, like sod. And then when I try to say it the other way, I W too hard, S.W.O.R.D. So I don't, S.W.O.R.D.
S.W.O.R.D. See, now I'm in my head about it.
It's a very hard S.W.O.R.D to pronounce. I will say, I struggle bus for me. So I'm just going to keep referring it to that organization, just like the event, the organization. But I do think if they don't end up where it is that they are in the comics, it's kind of like, why did you steal their, like, bitch stole my line? What? Why? Take your own. Doesn't make sense. So I think that would make me satisfied and happy if they do end up going back and it's not weapon anymore.
Yeah. So moving forward in the episode, we of course we see Monica get sucked into Westview, and because she's Geraldine in the show. But before that, we get reintroduced to Jimmy Woo, played by Randall Park, and after that, we get reintroduced to Darcy from the first two Thor movies, and this is where we really start investing into the MCU of it all. And I think, Roxy, maybe this might be why Twitter was way on board, because it's like, oh yeah, this is an MCU show. And this also might have been where it started. This is probably where it started losing me, and it might have been where it started losing you as well. What did you think about the reintroduction of Jimmy and Darcy?
I'm somebody who typically likes cameos, and I like seeing these two people that I believe to be very talented actors.
Yes.
So I was excited about them being part of the show, but their actual actions did nothing for me. I don't know whether they were trying to play off the fact that they were trying to make it a little unclear where Darcy's position is. Like, is she good? Is she bad? You know, she's got that scene in the truck where she asks them all what their specialty is, and she's like, nobody cares or whatever. And nothing for the actors. I think the actors did a great job with their performances. They did exactly what they were trying to do, but why exactly we needed to spend so much time on watching them watch the screen that we had just watched, and then discovering what we have already discovered and then do like I was kind of like, okay. I feel like we're spending 20 minutes too long on me watching you guys watch somebody else when I just want to be watching somebody else. Like I would have rather jumped to the 80s and just had another episode there because it's fun.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this for me, this was you describing as them watching stuff like that. That was really where things started to grind down for me because I was just thinking about other classic mystery shows like Lost or Twin Peaks, and it's like, what if you had it the show. And not even like seasons in, like episode 4 just stopped and you watch somebody watching Lost be like, why are they on the island? And I'm like, yeah. I also want to know that. Why are we, you can tell me why we're on the island or get out of here because I also have the same question. You're not helping me at all.
Yeah, I don't know whether they thought that we didn't realize that they were in a sitcom and they needed to like do that setup, but we did realize.
Yeah.
So I didn't need somebody else to say they've created this sitcom reality because like yes, that's what you showed me for 3 episodes. I know that.
Yeah.
I know that.
And it made me, you mentioned that you now have concerns for the rest of the show. And I don't know if I'm concerned for the rest of the show, but I am. This did reveal that like, oh, at least these first 4 episodes have a pacing problem because we were talking about before we went on air, like I talked about it like last week when we were talking about the Batwoman premiere. You did the beep boop beep boop boop boop, which is a big part of basically all these superhero shows we watch. But it's normally integrated into the main action. And so when we watched the first 3 episodes, I was kind of stunned how little they did to let you in on not just on what the actual mystery of the show is. And that's what this episode was, but it was all that exposition was dumped into this episode. And it was like, having watched the 4 episodes, I think it would have been more productive if they'd integrated that into like like maybe you end the first episode being like, there are people on the outside. And then we kind of cut back and forth to being like the sitcom and what we're doing. And so we don't just live in this space of, again, watching people watch what we just watched.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think that, the reveal of Wanda, who's doing this to you, was not great enough for me to have justified 35 minutes of us leading up to that point, which is essentially what it is. We're watching like who was coming through the radio, but like, that very quickly when you start to hear his voice. So, but none of this actually, DJ, even is my biggest problem with the episode.
What's your biggest problem?
None of this really helped. My biggest problem is exactly what I've been talking about on this show every single week, which is that I really didn't want them to go with this chick is crazy route. And it feels to me like what they might be doing here, and there's merit to this because obviously they're borrowing from the comics, but just because somebody, and I want to make this abundantly clear because I took to Twitter and have been fighting with people all day about it and, come at me, but just because something happened in the comics doesn't mean I like it.
Yeah, that's fair.
When people say, but this is what happened in the comics, I'm not fighting that. It doesn't mean I like it.
Yes.
I have a lot of issues with some comic book storylines. Like I think, I've said this for years, it's a little different, but I have often an issue with how Lois Lane is portrayed in the comics.
Yeah.
And so I like to hold the movies to a higher standard because we are living in 2021. And when you have an antiquated character, it's time to upgrade her. Mm-hmm. So when people say to me, but this is what Lois Lane is like in the comics, I say, again, we're like not arguing that.
Yeah.
So I've read them and this I know. Mm-hmm. So when people are saying about Wanda, but this is what happens in the comics, that's not my point. My point is that it is 2021 and we are living in a time in which I have over and over and over again watched crazy women on TV and movies not be able to handle loss. So they go insane and they take everybody down with them.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's what this show is going to do. But if she ends up being, instead of the ultimate hero, the ultimate villain that Wanda could become because she can't handle her own reality, then I'm not stoked on that. And that wasn't a story that I really needed to be told at this time. So I think that I do trust them, and I do trust that they could still make her the hero of this story. And instead of her being this like bat crap crazy woman. There's reasons for everything she's doing, and she's experienced a lot of trauma and whatever it is. That is something that I think they could still turn around. But the direction this made it feel like it was going to me was like with it's Wanda, is that she's a nightmare and she can't handle life, and that's just not. I don't care about that story.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair and legitimate concern, and if I were to make predictions, I think that it will be a mixed bag for you, because I think on the one hand, I do think this goes back to my initial theory that this is a creation of Wanda's, that her like in the comics, her powers affect her mental state and affect the reality around her. Unlike the comics, at least in this version, she's not murdering her friends and wiping out all mutants and all that. It's not quite as bleak as that. But I do think we're setting up where this is based on her power, and that about near the end, probably like 2 episodes before the end, Hayward, acting director Hayward, will be like, let's not save her, let's use her as a weapon, and then we'll have to unite to stop him, and he'll end up being the main, like that'll be Wanda's like snap out of it, I'm actually a hero moment where she has to defeat him. But it is, I do think that it's tricky, and it's something they're going to have to figure out again with Moon Knight as well, dealing with mental health and everything. I do think they're getting into that, and I do think it is dark, because I don't know about you, Roxy, the impression I got once we go back into the world and she turns around and we see the very surprisingly haunting image of Vision with his head crushed in, that his corpse is just walking around. She's just animated Vision's dead corpse.
Yeah, totally. And she seems 100% aware of what's going on. Nobody seems to be doing this to her. She seems to be doing this completely and have full power over it. Where Agnes comes into all of this, I'm not exactly sure. That could change things up a little bit for me as well. But for the most part, I think that they're putting themselves in a little bit of a tricky position. And if she does become this big bad, and then there is that kind of switch where then she comes back, then maybe I do enjoy it. But like you said, I think that this is going to be a mixed bag for me, because I think it's interesting how much people hated what happened in Game of Thrones, in the end of Game of Thrones with Daenerys, and how much they're rooting for that right now. Like the internet was like, I can't wait for her to go mad. Let her go completely mad. Let her lose her mind and go and like, exactly what you just said. Murder everybody, take everybody out. Wanda's the most powerful. And I was like, it's so weird that you guys were so upset about what just happened with Khaleesi, but that's what you're rooting for because of the comics. Like, just because something's been written doesn't mean that is the right story choice. It's just bizarre to me that like, and I will say, I really don't try to make everything a gender issue, because there's so many bigger issues nowadays than this thing. But the people that were rooting for that, I'm like watching a lot of fucking dudes on the internet being like, let her go crazy, this bitch is crazy, and I'm like, man.
Yeah. Well, and as we've talked about before, not to say that like all the criticisms coming from one gender or whatever, but I also noticed that a lot of the criticism towards the first 3 episodes was primarily coming from male audience members, and the female audience members seemed to be like into what was happening. I personally, other than like, I think again, like not everything in the superhero genre needs to be so specifically targeted to one audience. So I think it's a positive of more women, and maybe women that don't like superhero stuff, liked those episodes, because those people are out there and they should have a thing to enjoy.
Totally. And if you like the more MCU things, they still exist. They're still there. Nobody took them.
And they're still in this episode.
I did see a lot of women on the internet who loved this episode. In no way, shape, or form am I sitting here saying if you like this episode, then you are rooting for the demise of women. Like that's so not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, for me, it's tired. It's tired to keep telling these stories. Like, I've seen it 5 bajillion times. woman can't handle what's happening. Woman creates alternate reality she can live in for herself because not capable of dealing with the world.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's also going back to I think it's interesting that you brought up the Game of Thrones thing, because I think it goes back to our ongoing conversation about the idea of spoilers and expectations and wanting to, wanting to like please the audience, because I do wonder, like, at the end of Game of Thrones, everybody was like, well, I can't wait for the books. The books are just going to make this so much better. And it's like, why do you think that? It's just because the books, and I think about like, I think I mentioned this in our earlier reviews, that when I rewatched the MCU recently, for one of those rewatches, if you look at the way they handled the Black Widow Hulk relationship and the Scarlet Witch Vision relationship, it's essentially the same, but the response was completely different because one has precedent in the comics and one doesn't. And so merely by having precedent in the comics, you're fine. You're in the clear, because it doesn't matter how well within the movie you've established this or within your series you've established this. There's a precedent, so it's okay.
But you know what's interesting is like that doesn't always have legs, and this is what we saw. Think about Arrow. Okay, yeah. If we're staying in the comic world, think about what happened with Oliver, Queen, and Laurel.
Yeah.
And people like that had precedent in the comic, and then people were like, no, but Oliver and Felicity. Mm-hmm. Like, and you know, people were just rooting for something. But then when we got there, it was like, actually, they have zero chemistry and this doesn't work at all. It just doesn't make any sense. So if this show was like, no, but this is what we're doing because of the comics, but like, sometimes it's just not, I mean, they're two different mediums. It doesn't always translate. Yeah. And I think here, you know, there's difference between like visually reading and looking at something where somebody is like losing her crap, and that is not told as often there. And like, maybe you can relate to it differently and visualize it differently and what that looks like. But like on TV and in film, just the amount of times we've watched this with female astronauts. Mm-hmm. We've watched this with women who right after they have kids who can't handle that. We've watched this with we've watched it so in all of the different versions. And that doesn't mean that women can't go crazy. Of course they can go crazy, just the same as men can go crazy. Yeah. And the same as any human, any person who's born, anybody with consciousness, it could happen to anybody. But I know, because the world of Hollywood just keeps showing it to me, and it's like, I get it. Some women go crazy. I understand. I'm gonna go crazy watching all these women go crazy.
So where do you think that this could go that would make you feel better about it?
I think that if there was like merit to what she's doing, because she somehow knows that her children are going to be the saviors of something or whatever, and she's doing this to like actually do better for the world, and she's not doing this for the reasons that she just wants to be with her partner still who's dead. There's some like bigger purpose of what she's doing to try to protect people or do something that's positive, and she has knowledge that other people don't have, and then she ends up saving the day as opposed to wiping everybody out and just doing this so that she can spend more time with her loved ones. I think that would work for me. I don't know that that's where they go, but even if it's closer to that, then no, I deserve to be with everybody else lost people, but I deserve to be with my person, and we are going to have kids and we are going to have a happy life. And that's the only reason I'm doing this. And if anybody steps to me, I murder them all and take everybody out. That just is like, eh.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And it'll be interesting to see where we go. I do, as far as the sitcom stuff, there was a trailer that teased that we might get some like Modern Family / Office-esque playing to the camera type stuff. It'll be interesting to see if there's a narrative, like, because the implication I got with the drone that she finds, that's the helicopter, is that the more reality invades, the way, that's how the sitcom, we get color, you know what I mean? Things, the more her awakening happens, is the further we move forward. So maybe the playing the camera will have some sort of thematic relevance to it. I don't know. We did have.
Go ahead, DJ.
No, go for it.
I just have some like logistical questions still now, because I don't know if you have any thoughts on these things, but okay, so if she's doing this and she's been aware of this the whole time, which is seemingly what they're leading us to believe, then number one, why is she trying to make it a sitcom in terms of, take the magic show episode?
Yeah.
Why does she then keep making him, like, remember he went and got like poker day. He went to poker or did whatever with the guys.
Yeah.
And we see that, and that's not in her mind. He's like actually living that life. She's not there. And then he comes back and he's all messed up inside, and he keeps messing up the magic trick and trying to show them all that. Why did she do that?
Well,
if she's creating all this, why'd she do that?
Again, if I were a gambling man or a betting man, I would say that what we'll probably discover is that here's my pitch for where I think this show's going. I would imagine that Wanda, real sad about Vision dying, went to Agatha Harkness, who everybody's assuming Catherine Hahn is, who's in Jersey, who's in Westview, New Jersey. Because I believe, I'd have to double check this, but I believe when you see the montage, all the flyers that people put up of like, this is who this person is, that she's there, but they don't know who she is. So I would imagine that like, she went to this Agatha Harkness, who, like in the comics, is a great witch, wizard, whatever, and was like, how can I bring my guy back? And Agatha Harkness is like, well, reality altering, da-da-da. And so in trying to do that, she creates this Westview reality based on, she's going to say something like, oh, these are based on the sitcoms I loved growing up. And so she's creating scenarios. She's creating her perfect life, which are like these sitcoms that she loved growing up. So in these sitcoms, there's zany shenanigans. That's what life is in these sitcoms. And so that's what life is for her. And then and what's his face, Hayward's going to be like, let's harness this. And Monica's going to be like, and Wanda's going to have to snap out of it, save the day, but she's gonna be like, oh, Vision, sad, but here comes Vision from the multiverse. Wait, is that Doctor Strange? Multiverse of Madness. that's my summary of where I think the rest of the show is gonna go.
And you think that the only reason that she did this was, and I'm not saying the only reason, like she didn't love him, but you think the only reason she created this was to be with Vision?
I hope not. Like you, I hope not. But
it's possible.
But probably. And
it just feels like such a weak, and like maybe because I'm somebody who's experienced extreme loss in life, but like like some people die and it's horrible. It's horrible. But like you can't F up everybody else's life.
Yeah.
Like that's your reasoning. Your reasoning was because Vision didn't deserve to die. I know that everybody would do what they could to get their loved ones back if they could, but at the same time, like, come on, that's the only reason you just wanted to be with him another little longer. Yeah. So you did all of this. Oh man.
Yeah. I also think it's tougher too, because again, it's not like there was a season of WandaVision before Infinity War that set up their whole relationship. And now I'm super invested in their relationship. And also it's Vision, who on the one hand is not the most popular Avenger normally, and on the other hand is a robot. So I don't know how sad I'm supposed to be about him being dead.
No. Okay, my other logistical question is,
yes,
what do you think that situation, now looking back, what do you think that situation by the fence was with Agnes and the other neighbors and them trying to warn Vision? But now what is that?
I would imagine the explanation would be it's their subconscious realizing that she does not, because we have established that Westview was a neighborhood, that most of the people that are now part of the sitcom were neighbors in that. So, and they say like, she doesn't have a house here, she doesn't belong. So even though it looks like whatever enters, because even Monica, when she entered, kind of acclimated, she became Geraldine essentially. So I think everybody in there becomes their sitcom version of themselves. But even in that, they realize like, wait, this person doesn't live here. We're suspicious of that. I think it is a red herring. And again, I don't know if I like that explanation, but I think that would be what the explanation is.
Okay. I feel like I feel like what you think is going to happen for the rest of the series is like kind of 90% likely, and that makes me a little bummed.
Yeah, I think maybe live with that feeling, and then maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll do a
Totally.
swerve, and I think that you and I are at least both on the same page. That while we're concerned about that, weirdly, I'm excited to get back to the sitcom stuff. I was like, you know what? I thought I
Yeah.
wanted more MCU stuff. Turns out, just give me more of the sitcom stuff.
Totally. Yes, that is exactly how I feel. And also at the end of the day, I will say this show is very well made.
Oh yeah,
I'm watching it and I'm like, it's very cool that we are living in a time in which I'm watching a WandaVision show and it looks like this.
no,
So at the very least, even though it's a little problematic for me, when I'm watching it, I'm like, that's cool. That looks cool. I'm excited to laugh at the sitcom stuff. Oh, the way they shot that was interesting. Like, so that's, nothing for nothing. At least there's always going to be that.
yeah, agreed. And if the rest of the Marvel shows are able to maintain, like I feel like I'm watching a Marvel movie, which is impressive.
Yes.
And again, just puts to shame every other Marvel show that like Shield, Daredevil, all the rest of them. It's like, oh yeah, you were never going to be able to compete at this level. It just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So those are our thoughts on WandaVision. Let us know in the comments down below what you thought about this episode, where you think it's going to go, and whether you like this episode or not. And like and subscribe and all that, share all that stuff. And we'll be back next week with our review of episode 5.